Okay, good morning, everyone. On this sunny day, I'm coming at you from Singapore. We're going to wait for everyone to arrive, maybe 1 or 2 minutes, and then we'll get started with today's webinar, which is about Scopus, really focused on content. So the journals, conferences, and books. What is in Scopus? How do we select it? How do we curate it? And how can you find it? With me is Nicholas. He's just on the other side of Singapore.
Hi, Sandra. Morning there. Really sunny from my side as well. I do need some blackout curtains eventually at some point, but I'll get down to that.
Yeah, it makes for a difference from the generally rainy days we've been seeing in the last few months. So have you got any trips planned to Malaysia?
Probably in July, as a matter of fact. So I'll be seeing some of you over there pretty soon. It's been way too long. I really enjoyed like my last physical trip when I met customers face to face. I thought it was a lot better to get insightful exchanges with them when that happened. So looking forward to it. What about yourself?
We'll certainly be there in September. I'm flying to Holland this Thursday, and I'll be away for 5 weeks. I'll be working part-time. And then I come back. We've got a couple of things to do already in the books in Singapore. But after that, I'll go to Malaysia. So we've got 96 people that have joined so far. We probably just make a slow start and give everyone a warm welcome to today's session about Scopus content. My name is Alexander. I'm joined by Nicholas. We're both senior consultants for Elsevier based in Singapore. And this is, I don't even know which number the session is. I think it's maybe number 4 of 6 planned webinars for the Scopus Consortium in Malaysia. Today is focused on the content. So we want to cover how does Scopus select and curate content? Because that's one of the key features of Scopus, that it's a curated database. It doesn't include everything. It's selective. Then how can you find the right journal, conference, and book, whether it's for reading purpose or for targeting something for a manuscript? We'll show you how to navigate in Scopus and how to use some of these metrics to understand differences in journal quality. Predatory publishing, yeah, it's a topic, right? It's something that still comes up. So we're gonna look at what is predatory publishing and what are some of the things you need to watch out for. What does Scopus do to address this important topic? Q&A, if you have questions, just pop them in the Q&A box. We'll try to answer them either along the way or at the end. Also, we've set up certificates. If it's important to you to get a certificate for today's session, we'll give you the link at the end and the code for you to get the certificate. So did I forget anything, you think, Nick?
Nope, I think you pretty much covered it all.
I'm gonna put my water on the other side. All right, so as always, we're gonna start at the beginning with the introduction to Scopus. Just in case you don't know what Scopus is, most people do. So it's a very comprehensive curated abstract and citation database that sources peer-reviewed scientific information, metadata, from about 7,000 publishers. So it includes a lot of journals, conferences, and books. And then it does some pretty cool data enrichment. So we create profiles for every author, profiles for every institution, profiles for the journals. It could be used kind of as a search and discovery tool. You can find things, but you can also analyze and understand differences in quality, different aspects of research performance you can see there for a journal or an author or an institution and so forth. All of the 20 public universities in Malaysia have access to Scopus via a consortium organized by the Ministry of Higher Education and Elsevier. Scopus data is linked, so that I mentioned that, we don't just put the data in a database, but we do enrichment, and part of that is linking everything together. So every paper is linked to an author. Authors are linked to the institutions to the co-authors, potentially even funding and so forth. So it doesn't matter your starting point. If you search for paper, you can link to the author, from the author to the other papers, or from the author to the co-authors, or you might search for an author and look at the person first and link from the person to the papers and so forth. So it's linked data in this day and age that makes sense. People like me, born a long time ago, it's like, wow, it's all connected. It's amazing. So Scopus is web-based, right? Scopus.com. Profiles is a big part. I think we just mentioned every researcher has a profile in Scopus Metrics. So we have different numerical values that represent things like how many papers, how many citations, or H-index, or site score. You know, there are different metrics that represent some aspect of research. There are APIs if universities want to source Scopus data and integrate it into a research management system or repository, they can use the API. Some governments also buy custom data, which is really buying the raw data from us to do really custom projects. Sometimes that happens. Though I think for end users, that's not the most likely scenario. You want to cover this, Nick?
Yep, sure thing. So what we have constantly done with the product is that we've been trying to update this at every single layer and aspect. So in terms of comprehensive curated content, that's something which you're aware that we do. Scopus, for instance, is updated on a daily basis. It has brought expert curated content that's being managed by the Content Selection Advisory Board. It includes different content types like journals, books, and conference proceedings. And it's not just only from the Western world, but it is also very holistic and covers a lot of content from specifically Asia Pacific, ANZ, Europe, etc. There's a lot of data and metrics that are all linked together, and it's the only database which implements an algorithmic and systematic author, as well as organization or affiliation, disambiguation for profiles. So this helps you, and this allows you to trust it in terms of research management as well as decision support. One thing that, and what we have been doing, is that there's actually a product roadmap that was implemented throughout the year as well, especially for 2022. So you'll be able to see developmental priorities that are linked to your research needs, right? So this helps to improve speed and ease. This improves research signals around it, as well as discoverability, as well as analytical capabilities. And what, for instance, we do is that we support user onboarding and engagement through the Scopus certification program for librarians. This is something we've talked about previously, as well as, you know, being the CCs that you like to refer to. Back to you, Sander.
Thanks, Nicholas. So the content that's in Scopus comes from many different publishers. Like we said, it's like 7,000 publishers, but you know, all the big publishers, only 11% of the titles that are in Scopus come from Elsevier. Only about 40% come from the big publishers. 60% of the titles come from smaller publishers. Could even be independent journals that are just part of a university's a journal portfolio. So journals basically submit, if they want to be in Scopus, they submit and go through a selection process, which we'll explain later. This is from February this year. So now we have more than 85 million records, right? So papers that are indexed in Scopus. You can see that our content comes from 105 different countries. We cover 45 different languages. So the full text does not need to be in English, but obviously the abstract and title needs to be translated into English if it's non-English. It's a dynamic database, so every day there are around 11,000 new papers being loaded. We're increasingly, you know, having more open access content. So we have almost 18.5 million documents which are open access documents, so they're not behind a paywall. We cover all of the major subject areas. The journals have really good coverage of all subject areas. Conferences, where we cover 140,000 conference events, so serial conference events, which are quite skewed towards engineering and computer sciences. We've kind of beefed up our coverage of books. We have both individual books and book series, which are very focused on social sciences and arts and humanities. So yeah, comprehensive content from every place in the world, many different languages, many different fields, many different content types. So how do we select and curate the content? And that's a key difference between Scopus and, for example, Google Scholar. Scopus carefully selects the content that's in the database and does some curation to ensure that any content that no longer meets the standard will be removed. So we do that with a content selection advisory board. It's a small picture at the bottom, but it's a group of 17 subject chairs, one from a different field. Each one is a prominent researcher in a different field. They don't work for Elsevier. Most of them work at universities as professors, and their mandate is to choose which journal. So when a journal gets submitted to Scopus, it will land on the desk of one of those subject chairs, and they will decide whether the journal should be added to Scopus or not. So in that way, if you look at the total ecosystem, you know, of scholarly journals in the world, we cover a subset of those which we've selected with that process. That process and the mandate is really at a journal level. So we don't choose individual articles, right? So when you see all the articles that you find in Scopus, we're not choosing this article yes and that article no. We're selecting at the journal level. So if we select a journal, it means that we've holistically evaluated the journal. We look at, you know, the aims and scope and the editorial board and the authors and citation performance and quality of the articles and so forth. And if there's a trust that this journal is great quality, it's got the right management, it's going to do good for many more years, it can be included in Scopus. And the moment that it is, all the papers that are published in that journal are included in Scopus. So we don't interfere with the editorial autonomy of journals that we selected. We can, if there are some concerns about a journal, remove a journal. So if there were, for example, fraudulent articles were published and we investigate this and reevaluate the journal and see that actually they're not implementing enough quality control, then the journal can be discontinued, but it means that the entire journal, we stop indexing it. So we never really working at an article level, right? So that should just be really clear. The CSAB, yes, it's a human being, an expert making a decision, but they orient their evaluation of a journal around quite transparent criteria. I'm not going to go through them. We do these in editor workshops. And it's literally like a 2 to 3 hour discussion on exactly what each one of these categories means, but it's quite transparent. Yeah, it's tempted to like kind of go over some of them, but I think it's outside of the scope of today to go into that in too much detail. But I think it is in scope to say each year we receive on average, right, about 3,500 suggestions per year. So that's 3,500 journals saying we want to be in Scopus, right? About 39% of them meet the minimum criteria to be in Scopus, right? And then of those, about 46 are accepted. So of the originally submitted 3,500, we would be accepting around 630. So it's very difficult to get into Scopus. If you look on the right, we are always re-evaluating or monitoring the performance of the journals that are in Scopus and can discontinue any journal that no longer meets the quality criteria. So in that sense, it's curation. It means that we want everything that's in Scopus to be of the highest quality so that you can depend on it and not wonder, is it good quality, is it predatory, and so forth. This is the acceptance rejection rates for a number of countries for the period 2011 to 2019. So there were 13,000 titles that were reviewed, and you can see the acceptance rejection rates are differing a lot between different countries. So for example, Singapore's acceptance rate was pretty high. The United Kingdom was exceptionally high. India was exceptionally low with 175 journals accepted, 932 rejected. Malaysia, we've worked quite closely with MCC, now known as PSI, to help editors understand the criteria for getting Malaysian journals in Scopus. Nonetheless, if you look at the decade, more journals were rejected than accepted, and that's something that we're looking at, how to support the Malaysian journal editors more. So yeah, the rates differ a lot between countries, and we're doing our best to work with not only Malaysia, but also Indonesia, Thailand, and other countries in Southeast Asia to get more local content into Scopus. But overall, we have already quite a few. I think we have almost, 80 or 90 Malaysian journals in Scopus. So it's not too bad. Reevaluation. So how do we reevaluate the content that's already in Scopus? Is basically you take the 27,000 titles that are in Scopus, we monitor them based on 3 categories. One is kind of direct feedback from people like you. So if you were to call Nicholas and say, hey, there's this journal that's in Scopus, and I think that I see really a fundamental problem with the journal. I think that they're not doing peer review. They're just accepting money and publishing anything. Then Nicholas will probably say, do you have any evidence? And then if you do have evidence and you provide that to Nicholas, he's going to provide it to the Scopus team. The team will then flag that journal as a journal that needs to be reevaluated. So it means they don't take a decision at that point. They just decide that the journal needs to be holistically reevaluated by the same group that does the selection of journals. The second category is really performance, looking at journals that perform a lot less well than comparable other journals. So for example, if a journal is receiving almost no citations. Third, radar is like a machine learning AI type thing that identifies strange outlier performance in journals, big changes in number of papers that are being published, or maybe some strange citation behavior or big changes in the editorial board. So those 3 things are used to flag journals that need to be reevaluated. They go to the CSAB, and the relevant CSAB member makes a decision either to keep the journal in Scopus or to discontinue it. I've already explained those categories here, so I won't go over them again. So in the period between 2016 and 2020, and I know it's 2022 now, although if you don't count the COVID years, I think it's still 2020. No, joking. We reevaluated about 1,000 journals, and then you see that 434 of those were because of publication concerns, where we discontinued 289 of those journals. So discontinued about 67%. For the underperformance, discontinued 50%. For outlier performance, discontinued 50%. So it's roughly like, I guess we've discontinued around 50% of the journals that have been reevaluated, which means 50% of them, we looked at them and said, okay, there was a reason to reevaluate them, but upon looking closely and holistically at the journal, we think that it's okay to keep them in Scopus. The quality is good, and that's why the process is there, because just having a concern isn't enough reason to throw someone out of, or throw a journal out of Scopus. You can see which journals are in Scopus, which ones have been discontinued in the title list, which you can download directly from Scopus, or from, there's an Elsevier page that has the title list. I'm going to demonstrate that a little bit later in Scopus, how you can find this list, but it's got like a neat list of exactly which titles are discontinued. You can see the status of every journal, if it's active, inactive, which one's been discontinued, why it was discontinued, and what the last volume and issue that's covered in Scopus is. That list is updated once a month now. We also indicate now in the journal page in Scopus a journal that's been discontinued. Here it says coverage discontinued in Scopus. Typically, in 99% of the cases, the older content stays in Scopus. So you can see that this journal, the Scopus coverage is 2016 to 2019, but after 2019, we stop indexing the new papers. But in most cases, we keep the older content in Scopus. So that's curation, and that's how we uphold quality. But for you, you're probably wondering, how can I find the right journal, conference, or book in Scopus, whether you're a student, researcher, librarian, administrator. You might want to find something to read. You might want to find something to target it for a manuscript. You might be looking for something for someone else if you're working at a university and supporting researchers in some way. So there's different reasons to find a journal. And Nicholas is actually more of an expert than me in helping people think through what are some of the considerations, if you're a researcher, especially, how do you go about that task of like, which journal should I publish in? So over to you, Nick.
Thanks a lot, Sandra. So I would say that a very useful way to start off first would be to ask your colleagues, your peers, your friends for what are the recommendations for the journals that you'd normally be interested in reading in, right? I'm sure your community and your colleagues will always have a couple of journals that they would refer to. So you can first start it off and get the ball rolling by reaching out to them. The next thing you can do is to get insights from a supervisor, a mentor, as well as the authors whom you are reading. They would usually point to you in a couple of journals as well. The alternative would be to reach out to your librarians and to ask them to provide you a consultative service as well. Next slide, please. So another one you can do is to look at the articles which you have cited and then take a look at where they have actually been published in. This is a very useful way because now you're actually able to identify the content and the source of the content which you are normally using, right? So if you're frequently using a couple of journals for your research, it's entirely likely that this couple of journals are more or less the pillars of research within your community as well, right? Another example would be to note the journals referenced in the bibliography of key papers in your field. So try to be observant, right? Try and also consolidate, for instance, a couple of sources where you're getting your research from, see which seminal papers and which are the seminal journals these papers are being published into. Usually you find that there's actually a very strong confluence of similarity and commonality there. The third thing you can do is to search for authors within your field and to identify which journals that they are actually publishing in. And this is something that you can easily do within Scopus, where you look for, say, keywords, you go to the index page, you can go towards the journals itself and identify which journals are the ones that publish the most often for this particular topic. Next slide, please. And I'll always encourage people to start the entire process with the end in mind to understand what is it that you want to accomplish. You can demarcate it accordingly to the 5 following steps. You can ask yourself, what is the format that you want to publish the manuscript in, right? Would it be, say, an original research article? Would it be, say, a review article? Or would it be, say, for instance, a conference proceeding? All this matters, right? Because different journals will have different aims and scopes and specializations. You need to check with your funding body. Is there a necessity to publish Go Open Access, or would you like to publish Go Open Access? Or would you choose to not want to publish Go Open Access and having to pay an APC and instead publish in a subscription journal? Once again, all these options exist, so it's entirely up to you to select which particular route you want to pursue. You may also want to seek to publish a title with a multidisciplinary or an interdisciplinary focus. You need to also, once again, ask yourself if you want to publish with a specific publisher per se too. Some people have publisher preferences. If that is the case, you can go to the publisher, you can go to the journal finder of that specific publisher, and you'll be able to filter through some of the journals that you want to choose to publish into. Last but not least, you need to ask yourself if there is a necessity to publish research data or any other additional outputs alongside this article itself. All of these are actually options for you to consider. Next slide, Sander. So there are many options that you can actually start when you go to the Scopus source list, right? And I think that this is a really useful tool and very integrated within the entire process. So you could, one, search for topics within Scopus itself, like what I mentioned, or two, you can go to the source page itself and browse through the full range of journals that we have indexed within Scopus, which is up to 42,000. Next slide, please.
And so I'm just wondering, I know people wonder this sometimes, is if we say we cover 27,000 titles, why are there 42,000 in our results here?
So what we see over here is a list of active as well as inactive journals as well. And you'll be able to see, if I'm not mistaken, books as well as conference proceedings amongst others. So this is why the source title list is a lot more comprehensive than otherwise.
That's right. Yeah, it includes also the inactive titles. And in the source list here, if you download the source list, you can see everything, including the status and so forth. So here, oh yeah. So Nick, how would we use this if we're using a subject filter?
So this is actually a very good question, and I think people don't use this often enough. So I'm very glad that you pointed this out. So we actually, not only are we able to search for Scopus titles by, say, the title or by the ISSN, which are the two most common ways to do so, and also the most accurate, what we are able to do is to browse by subject areas and sub-subject areas, right? And if I'm not mistaken, this would be the ASJC, right, Sander?
Yeah, these are the ASJC 333 categories.
So over here, now you're able to filter down not just only by a subject area, but also by a sub-subject area, which is really useful, right? So if you're interested in, say, food science as well as agronomy and crop science, you're also able to select this as well. You can also choose to enter the publisher. And in this case, if you want to choose to browse by Elsevier or say Springer Nature or by Taylor and Francis, these are all options that you can all leverage on when you're on this particular page.
So I guess here we're looking at the results, right? So you can see at the top, they've selected agronomy and crop science, food science, and publisher Elsevier, and you see that there are 82 journals as a result. And also on the left here, you see they've selected only first and second quartile journals. So you have these filters, and we'll show you, I think, live how this works in just after we show just a couple more slides. So why would you select quartile 1 or 2? Well, as a researcher, maybe there's a requirement or incentive from the university employing you saying, you know, we really want you or require you, or we'll reward you more if you publish in a first or second quartile journal. So if you want to know which ones those are, we'll talk about that a little bit more because there are different journal metrics. But if they say it's quartile 1 or quartile 2 based on site score, very easy to use this filter in Scopus. Likewise, if your publisher, if the journal the funder requires you to publish in an open access journal, and you want to know which of the journals are open access, you can use that filter here. Those are very pretty lines. Yeah, so the actual list of all the sources you can download here. And it's a big Excel sheet. I'll actually demonstrate that as well. I think that's what Nicholas was saying. You can explore already online. So again, we have 3 journal metrics that represent journal quality. We're going to explain them in a bit. Site score is probably the easiest to understand, and it's the one that the quartiles are based on in Scopus, although we also have SNP and SJR. If you are using SJR quartile, then you have to go to the SJR website to see the quartile of the journal. Yeah, so here are those metrics that we were talking about. So when we talk about differences in quality between serial titles, and a serial title is any regular publication that has an ISSN. So it can be a journal, it can be a serial conference event, or it can be a book series. So all of those serial titles in Scopus have metrics to understand the differences in quality. All 3 of them are based on citations, but they're a slightly different way of calculating a metric using citations. Site score is the most simple in a way because it's essentially the average number of citations per paper based on a 4-year period of publications and a 4-year period of citations. So it's very simple because you can literally calculate it yourself if you find the number of papers and citations. It's a simple formula. It's developed by Elsevier. We also have SNP, which is source normalized impact per paper. This is a metric that was developed by CWTS in Leiden University in my home country of Holland. They are bibliometric specialists, like they've published really leading bibliometrics papers for many years and developed a number of metrics. SNP is field normalized, so it actually normalizes the average number of citations in the field to 1.00. So if a journal has a SNP of 1.2, it would indicate 20% more citations than the average of its field. So that makes it easy to interpret in a way, because if it's 1.8, it's 80% more citations. If it's 0.9, it's 10% less citations, right? So it's easier to compare journals across fields, but it's difficult to replicate. You have to kind of trust that the number is correct because the calculation is complex. You don't have access to all of the steps in calculating that, right? SJR, this one is actually popular in Southeast Asia, is a Schemago journal rank that's also created by a different company that works closely with us. So that is Felix de Moya, Schemago. It's actually a small Spanish company, I think, that they've been using Scopus content to create different metrics for many years. And one of them is a journal metric called SJR. And we've integrated that into Scopus. SJR, just like SNP, is field normalized, but it counts some citations more than others. So if a journal receives a citation from Science or Nature, a really prominent journal, those citations count more than a citation from a less prominent journal. So it makes it more of a prestige measure, but also very complex calculation. So it's difficult to replicate, a little bit less transparent. We include all 3 because that way you have choices. You can use more than one if you wish. But I think it's important if you're talking about journal quality and quartiles, and someone says, we require you to publish in quartile 1 or quartile 2, the first question should be, which journal metric are we talking about? Because people mix it up all the time. If it's site score, then you have to clearly go and look at which journals are in that quartile for site score. If it's SJR, you need to go onto the SJR website and find out which journal belongs to which quartile, right? So that, I think, clarity on which metric we're using when we talk about quartiles is super important. I mentioned already, site score is pretty easy. You just take 4 years of content and citations from the same 4 years, right? So site score 2021 is papers from 18 through 2021. It's updated like once a year in June, right? So it's a static thing that is updated once a year. Those are the formal numbers, but there's also a tracker, so you can kind of see how next year's number develops over time. So you get a bit of insight into where each journal might land 1 year from now. Yeah, so every journal, you can see those 3 metrics here. So you can see that the site score of this Journal of International Economics is 4.8. So it means that it was, on average, each paper published in that journal was published 4.8 times. Yeah. SNP here, it's 3.1, let's say 3.18. So that means that the papers were cited 3.18 times as often as the world average for the field that the journal's in. And similarly, 3.7 for SGR, which has that element of prestige, also means 3.7 times the average for the field, right? So we've got the simplistic site score, easy to calculate, and 2 slightly different field-weighted journal metrics for every journal. You can see a lot of things about site score. So like I said, site score is transparent. It's pretty easy to see, hey, this site score is 4.8 because it was 353 documents, received 1,699 citations. It's just a simple division. You can kind of field normalize it because for site score, it will show you the percentile that the journal belongs to. So this journal belongs to 2 different categories. It belongs to econometrics and finance, as well as economics and econometrics. So 2 subdisciplines. And it shows you that in finance, actually, it ranks 31 out of 288 journals. So that's the 89th percentile, which is the top 11%. So that's top quartile. In economics and econometrics, it is number 86 of 661 journals. So that's the 87th percentile, also top quartile. So even though the metric is not field normalized, you can make sure that the comparison for the quartiles is done separately for each of the 333 disciplines. So it's a fair comparison, and that's how the quartiles work, right? So you have to understand percentile, right? 89th percentile means top 11%, right? So top quartile is top 25%. So that falls in the top quartile. You can see which journals are the top journals for any category. So here we have the category finance, and you can see this journal is number 31, but you could also see which one is number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, right? So you can always see what are the top journals for any given category. We can see the trend in site score for this journal, which went up, right? So that's also pretty cool. Oh, Nicholas, you want to go through this? It moved to advanced search, but the journal comparison.
Sure, I think this actually is a nice way to sum it up. So I would say that this is probably what I'll go through right now is the theory part. And I think that this is a good seek for us to go through to a live session later as well. So one of the key things that when we talk about advanced search itself, when you want to list journals that you want to compare metrics to, you can look at compare sources to actually really benchmark them. So when you select on advanced document search, you'll be there. And then on the top, on the right corner, we can select compare sources, right? And this gives you more details. But let's take a look at this in more detail on the next slide. So what you can actually do is that you can choose up to 10 journal sources to compare. This is useful. So after initially going through the source pages and seeing the live section, you may want to short down up to 10 journals which you think may be very useful for you, or you like to have more insights towards. And the next question you want to ask yourself is, how do they stack up and how do they perform in relation to one another? So this is where you select the 10 journals. You can type down their titles or by the ISSN itself, and then you can choose it and then you shortlist them. Then this is where you can shortlist them and compare them based on the metrics that we just talked about, including SJR, SNP, and site score. There are a couple of additional categories, including documents by year. So you're able to see how many documents the journal publishes every single year. You can see which one has published more articles, which one published less, etc. You'll be able to see what we call a percentage of review articles by year. So this will be useful, for instance, if you're looking to specifically publish a review article. And of course, in such a case, you probably want to publish the review article with a journal that tends to publish more review articles. The last but not least is what we call a percent not cited by year metric. This one is very interesting because you're able to see how many percent of a journal's articles where they are not being cited at all. So ideally, if you're an early career researcher, you want to publish in a journal with a low percent not cited because it shows everyone is reading and citing every single article within that journal itself. So this gives you a very good barometer of how well the journal is performing in terms of metrics, in terms of raw output, some of its behavior. This gives you more insights as to whether or not you may want to choose a certain journal to publish in or otherwise. So to give you some examples and some of the insights that you probably be able to see here. So if you look at the first diagram on the left, we can see that there's a journal demarcated in blue that has the highest number of citation counts. But to put it into context, this is also because it is the highest number of documents published every single year, right? So these are insights that you probably want to understand and to take it with you as well. So if you look at, say, site score, right? You can see that the Red Journal has a very high number of citations per paper on average. We can see all journals have received expected citations, which are more than average from the same subject field when we're looking at source normalized impact by year, because once again, 1 is the baseline barometer. So I'm looking at the diagram in the middle. And then based on SJR metric, we can see all these journals, they have received citations weighted on subject field and prestige more than the average itself as well, right? So these are additional insights that you may want to consider. So like I mentioned earlier, this particular journal would have a high number of review articles. So this is food for thought. And some journals have a low percent not cited, which means that it means that your article has a higher likelihood to be cited as well.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. I've always liked the one where you can see how many review articles that they publish. And percentage not cited is actually really interesting one, because if a journal has a very high percentage of papers that are never cited, then that actually tells a lot. It means that their citations are coming from a small percentage of their papers rather than being distributed rather evenly over the content. So I'm not going to go into these calculations. I think that it was enough said already that SNP and SGR are complex, right? They're field normalized metrics. So the calculation is complex, which means you can't replicate it very easily. You just need to understand the concept that it's comparing the journals to other journals in the same field. 1.00, it becomes world average, right? So the field for SNP is not defined with ASJC. It's actually looking at all of the papers that cite the journal and creating a kind of custom field. So also that's something that would be really difficult to replicate, right? It's a very complex process gone into creating the metric. And Schemago journal rank also, the algorithm is actually similar to Google's PageRank. So it's kind of like a network theory one. Yeah, you're not going to be able to replicate it. You just need to understand the concept and understand that Schemago journal rank includes a kind of prestige measure. So some citations are weighted more than others based on the prestige of the journal, and that it is field normalized. I think now we get to go to the fun parts and go to Scopus. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, so we get to Scopus. It is www.scopus.com. Within the IP range of your university, you should have access. Clearly geared around search, right? You can search for documents, you can search for authors, and you can search for affiliations, which is institutions. For content, we've put it up here. So you go to sources at the top right. And yeah, we see the 43,685 results. We could do the subject filter. I'm quite fond of the subject filter. And we'll go to, again, there are a lot of categories, right? So I studied developmental psychology. So I will go to psychology. And either I can select psychology as a whole, or if let's say my paper is about specifically the effect of education on the ultimate well-being of children, or maybe a particular type of education compared to the current type. I would look in developmental and educational psychology, or let's say that it's something to do with the effect of being vegetarian on the IQ of adolescents. I don't know, I'm making it up, but often manuscripts are really specific, right? So you need to find a journal that is suitable. So I'm going to start in developmental educational psychology. Although if it was really about vegetarianism, I might want to select a couple of medical journals as well, right? So you have to think, let's say I received funding from a funder that said, we really, Alex, we want you to publish in an open access journal. If you take our money, you have to publish the results in open access. I'm like, fair enough. So here I select open access, and my university says, we will promote you if you publish 4 papers in Quartile 1 journal this year. So I'm like, I really want a promotion. So I'm going to select first quartile here, and then press apply, and we'll see there's 9 results. So that's pretty thin. But yeah, I was talking about the effect of being vegetarian on intelligence. So maybe this journal here. Interesting, the Malaysian Journal of Learning and Instruction. So I was talking about different educational techniques and testing how they compare, which are really interesting experiments to do. But I see here the Malaysian Journal of Learning and Instruction. Let's say I'm interested in this one. If I click on it, it's going to show me that it's actually belonging to University Utara Malaysia Press, coverage years, site score, right? So it here in developmental psychology ranks number 166 to 341. So that's 51st yeah, so that's Q2, right, Nick?
Yep.
So that's Q2. So if Q2 is, if I'm still getting my promotion, I'll consider this journal. Maybe I need to negotiate with my boss. So you can see that's based on the site score of 2.5. So on average, the papers published in this journal received on average 2.5 citations, right? Trend, is it going up? Oh yes, this journal is going places. So I'd be like, I want to be part of this journey. No, so this one's growing quick. That's great. A journal can belong to more than one category here: cultural studies, education, developmental and educational psychology. So make sure you select the right category here. And then you can see, the number one journal in this field is the Lancet. Okay. And then, so, even if you started looking at a particular journal, you'll be able to see all of the other journals related to the area that you're looking at. You'll be able to look at the documents. So if this journal is a potential target for me, I might view the documents and look at the most recent papers and get a sense of what they're publishing. So this will help me to judge whether my manuscript is a good match for this particular journal, because you can see the topics that they're publishing in. If this journal is really something that you're considering to publish in, you should go to the website of the journal as a last step, right? Just search in so you should go here and then find out what the guidelines are for authors, right? So guideline for writers. So here, that typically on the website of a journal, they will give you instructions about what how they want things to be structured, right? So that you can make sure that your manuscript meets their requirements. But also, I always advise, when you look at a journal, is to look at the about the journal and really understand the aims and scope and see what's their vision, right? What's the vision and mandate of the journal? And then think, does your manuscript contribute to that? Is it something that fits in there? So that's how to do that in Scopus. Now, how about, this was using SiteScore. How about someone says, well, actually, we want to use SJR. Fine, then you can just use SJR journal rank, right? SJR has its own website. And there you can see for every journal which quartile it's in according to SJR. So you just have to go to a separate web page. If I search for the Malaysian Journal of Learning and Instruction, we can see a bunch of metrics about it here.
Sander, I think what we can also do is to take a look at compare sources. But I guess the limitations there would be that it only takes up to 10 other source types that you can compare to.
Yeah. Sure. So I'm going to go up here to the top right and go to comparative sources. So we can see that this journal is publishing, or has a higher and higher site score. So you can just select which journals you want to look at and see the trends and choose whether you want to look at site score or SJR or SNP. All of the kind of metrics that Nicholas showed you before. See how many review articles or percentage of papers that are not cited. So you can see all that kind of stuff. If you want to see a table view, if that's easier. Some journals didn't exist in 1996, so that's why it has zeros up until the point that it exists, right? I'm just thinking, is there a place to select the years? There doesn't appear to be. But... Okay, so we started our journey at the top by going to sources. In this case, we use the subject area filter along with the filters here for quartiles. These quartiles, by definition, use site score, right? And then you can look at the details of any journal just by opening the journal page. It will show you the 3 metrics. It will show you the current site score, the rank, and you can look at the other journals here, site score, rank. In some cases, you can link directly to the homepage of the journal. If that button isn't here, just search in Google for the title of the journal to find the instructions to the authors to understand what you need to do to submit there. Of course, you can always view all the documents. If I go back to sources, if you are worried about the status of a journal and you want to know which journals are active in Scopus or not, you can download the title list. So that's here, download the Scopus source title list. That is a big download, so it's about 25 megabytes. So it probably will take, in Singapore, not that long. It's relatively quick. So it'll probably take another 30 seconds. But that list is updated once per month and will give you detailed insight into every journal that's in Scopus, whether it's active or not, which journals have been recently added and which journals have been discontinued.
I think one of the questions that have been coming up very frequently is that in the past, there was a range of metrics that could be downloaded from the source list. I think in particular, the historical site score. So if people were interested in getting the site score metrics from 2020 or 2019, we used to have that, but now we don't have it. So I guess what we can do now is to request an overview of site score, SNP, and SJR journal metrics. So that's something which we can do as well now. So all we have to do, well, I'll let Sander show this first then.
So here is that source title list. It's a big list. And if you look, you have the source titles here. And if you look at column E, you can see which ones are active and inactive, right? So here you see that 3D Research is a journal that's inactive, and Scopus covers 2010 to 2019. I'll make it a little bit bigger. Also, if we scroll down, you can see this journal is in red, ABB Review, inactive. It was discontinued by Scopus, so we stopped indexing it after 2018. So you can always see which journals have been discontinued because they're in red. It says here discontinued. If you go to the third tab at the bottom, this is all the journals that have been discontinued. And it gives you even a reason why it's been discontinued. So you can see the journal name, ISSN, the publisher. So this journal, I remember I covered the 3 or 4 reasons why we reevaluate journals. So publication concerns, it means there were concerns about the performance of the editorial board. And these journals have been discontinued because of those publication concerns. And it will tell you that the final coverage, this is the last volume and issue that's covered in Scopus. After that, we don't index it anymore. Metrics basically means performance. Radar means we detected some strange activity. In all of these cases, these are the reasons why it went into reevaluation, and the Content Selection Advisory Board decided these journals should be discontinued, right? So the older content stays in Scopus in 99% of the cases. So you can see that from this point on, we stop indexing, but the older content stays in. On a happier note, you can also see the new journals that have been added to Scopus. So we are constantly evaluating journals, and new content gets accepted, and you can see those journals indicated here. So it's actually, a lot of new journals being added to Scopus. You can find that here. So again, really kind of important to know that that's there. This is the authoritative place to understand the status of a journal in Scopus. You also have these other tabs. You can look at all the conference proceedings. And if you want to understand the ASJC codes, the numbers that belong to each code, that's all in there, but maybe not exactly what you're looking for. So I'm going to go back to the Scopus. There we are. But Nicholas was saying, some people, typically librarians or research managers, like to have the list of historical site score metrics. You used to be able to download them directly from Scopus. Now you have to put in a request to do this. I don't think that the link is working properly at this point, but Nick?
Gotcha. No worries. We can, I mean, there's a FYI for those of you who are interested in wanting to know it. It still exists, but you just have to file in a manual request and you just choose the category of content. Yeah.
All right. Someone in the Q&A box has asked, what is H-index? So H-index is an author metric. So it's sometimes used for other entities, but it's basically very closely related to evaluating authors or researchers. So if I look at a particular researcher in Scopus, he's my professor at the University of Amsterdam. His H-index is 67. So it means that he's published 67 papers that have, each paper has at least 67 citations or more. So it's a measure of both productivity and quality, right? So not only has he published 67 papers, but all of those papers received at least 67 citations. So if you rank his papers, you see his most highly cited paper is 2,175 citations. Second one received 1,000 citations, right? Scroll down, you see his 67th paper received 68 citations, okay? His 68th paper received 67 citations. So once this paper gets one more citation, his H-index will go up to 68. So that's the H-index, very quickly explained. But I think we have another section on what is predatory publishing. And there are no other questions. Are there any comments that we need to address? No, so that was the only thing is what's the H-index. So Nick, can you still see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Predatory publishing, we talk a lot about it, but there have been some differences in interpretation of what exactly it is. So predatory publishing is essentially when a group of people use science as a way to make money without a genuine intent to further the cause of science and build bodies of knowledge. So they're basically publishers, entities, people that prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship, right? So they're characterized by false, misleading information. They're not applying best editorial practices. There's a lack of transparency, and often they're very aggressive in solicitation practices. So they're chasing people and saying, "Hey, you should publish with me. Like, I've got this great thing. If you publish with me, I guarantee you're going to get published. You're going to get into Scopus. You're going to get into Web of Science." They're very, very eager. And often they're not what they pretend to be. They're not actually doing a proper peer review. They're accepting money and making promises that they shouldn't make. So beware. You need to, I think it's the same if you live in a city and you walk around and someone on the street offers you something, like, "Hey man, I'm going to give you this brand new iPhone for $20. If someone's so eager to give you something, that you have to wonder, is this for real or am I being tricked? And unfortunately, with the online environment, everything is it's online now. It's easy to make a website. It's easy to pretend to be something that you're not. So you need to be a little bit careful with potentially publishing with a group of people saying that they're a professional journal. Maybe they say that they're indexed in Scopus, and do your due diligence. So some red flags are sometimes the web page looks unprofessional, Gmail addresses, no indication of who the editorial board are, and sometimes flashing banners saying that they're in Scopus websites. Lack of transparency, so they don't really explain much about their peer review process. Maybe they actually reach out to you and tell you that if you publish with them in return for money, because be clear, they're always asking money up front, they'll guarantee that you get published and that you'll be in Scopus and Web Science and all this. So those are definitely some warning signs. You should be aware that sometimes a journal that is in Scopus gets hijacked. So sometimes a journal is pretending to be a different journal. So it's the same as if someone else contacted you and said that they were Alexander van der Vellen from Elsevier, but actually they were not. So in this case, you can see that there are a number of journals like the Transylvanian Review and Journal Research on Lipido. I can never pronounce that word, but so please beware. There is a particular journal, the Solid State Technology Journal, which stopped publishing in 2019. So this was a real journal. It was covered in Scopus. It simply stopped publishing. So it's sometimes a journal, just like a person can kind of retire, right? It says, "Hey, I'm done," and some other entity took over its identity and set up a website, and people continued to publish in the journal, even though it was actually a completely different group of people pretending to be this journal, which had retired. So that's a journal hijacking. Yeah, so they had this website and everything. Here it says indexed in Scopus. You should write to us. We're indexed in all these databases, you know, so it looked really legit. A lot of people published in there. Yeah, so be careful. Also be careful for paper brokers. These are like middlemen, groups of people that are kind of saying that they have a partnership with a number of journals, and that if you work with them, and again, by work with them, it means pay them money, that they will guarantee that you get published in journals that are indexed in Scopus. There's 123MI in Russia, but there's also IJRDO. Yeah, just be careful if someone's promising you something that seems too good to be true. Yeah, so this one, IJRDO, here, submit your article for Scopus, and they even use the word Scopus. They make it seem like they work with us somehow. No, they don't. And even if this journal, even if one of these journals is in Scopus, if it turns out that they're not doing a proper peer review, they're going to get kicked out of Scopus. So don't take the risk, even if they seem to be working with a journal and you see that that journal is in Scopus. Don't submit via these types of parties. Every journal should be doing a proper peer review. Every journal should have its own website where you can submit your manuscript.
I think it's a lot of, when we look at IJRDO on the previous slide, I think it's really suspicious on many different levels. So it says that we are not indexed with Scopus and Web of Science, but we have a lot of requests for Scopus journals. So we have collaborated with a lot of journals indexed in Scopus and Web of Science. I think this is actually a very big warning sign. And I think also one more thing is that when you look at the email address, that's also a very big telltale sign. So this one has Scopus, but it's at ephjournal.org, which I think once again is something that you want to be aware of as well.
So Nura Muhammad Zuhudi asks in the chat, if we publish in a predatory journal and just realize that's the case, can we resubmit the article in another trustworthy journal? I think I'm not sure what the policy of the other journals is. So if the predatory journal has published the paper, I think you have to discuss it with the journal that you're submitting to. So I think it can get us into trouble because the paper might already be out there and then it's been published in a predatory journal. Doesn't mean there's a problem with the paper necessarily. So I'm not sure how journals deal with that. Is it something that you've heard of, Nicholas?
No, I've heard this a couple of times, but we need to ascertain the answer of it. This is something I will have to look into before I can say something concrete as well.
Yeah, so my advice would be, yeah, try. First of all, try to get the predatory publisher to take down the content. So if they have not put it online, that's great. And then if you submit it to another journal, you know, that it's not been put in the public domain. If it's published by a predatory publisher and they put it out in the public domain, yeah, I think it becomes a matter of discussion, right? Because the predatory publisher will say, we're not predatory, right? And the journal that you're submitting to might say, hey, we have a policy that we don't publish papers that are already published elsewhere. So it becomes a matter of debate whether a particular journal is predatory or not, right? There's no one authority, and there's often not agreement about whether a journal is predatory. If we see big concerns with a journal, we'll remove it from Scopus. But being removed from Scopus isn't, in everyone's eyes, the proof that it's a predatory journal. It just means we decided it doesn't meet the ethical standards to be in Scopus, right? So I think you have to be really careful not to publish in journals that have predatory behavior, because it might impact your chances to publish that manuscript elsewhere. But again, it's something to really be investigated. Maybe ask your librarian. It's something we'll look into and maybe come back to in a further session. You want to go through this one, Nick? Do you think check, submit?
Yeah, I think it actually ties in very well with the overall topic at hand. So Think, Check, and Submit is a cross-industry initiative led by a whole bunch of different organizations as well as individual publishers. So this is actually very useful, I think, and it also tackles the question on how you can be more careful when you're choosing a journal to publish in and how to be aware of predatory journals as well. So what it does is that it gives you very simple guidelines for authors to assess a journal before submitting an article. And it also applies to readers looking on how they may want to identify trusted sources. So it will give you a list of checklists, right? So think about it. Ask yourself if the journal is a right fit for the journal. Like, does it match the topic? Does it match the aims and scope? Does the journal publish a specific type of article? And also, is there a very reasonable chance of acceptance? Is it also read within the communities that you want to reach out to? Is it, for instance, indexed within Scopus or PubMed or Web of Science? Is it a journal of good quality, and can it be trusted? So you need to, the whole point is for you to think through all these processes, for you to verify it, and then before choosing to actually submit it, right? And I think it makes perfect sense because you spend probably about 3 months to 6 months on your research. The best thing you want to do is to find a good home for your work. So try not to rush through the entire process. Take your time, mull over it, and create a checklist that works for you and is accurate enough for you. And you should be able to avoid predatory journals by being very fastidious. Yeah.
Okay, great. Just a reminder, you know, the source title list, you can download it from Scopus or from the Elsevier website, and that is updated monthly, and you can see the status of the journals, which ones have been discontinued, why they've been discontinued, as well as the newly indexed journals. You can see the book list as well. So please don't forget that that's there. That is the most authoritative place to understand the status of a journal. We're going to go to questions. So there's no questions in the Q&A box, which means we have a very shy audience. So another comment in the chat box is, what if the articles we published in the discontinued Scopus journal after years, we can resubmit to another one? So I think we really need to come back on this, because if it's published in a journal and it's discontinued in Scopus, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone thinks it's a predatory journal. And a different journal might have a policy that says they don't publish articles that have been published in a different journal. So it's, I think, important to look at what policies journals have in place and understand the implications if you publish in a title in a journal and that journal gets taken out of a database like Scopus. What does that mean for your manuscript? What are your rights? So that's something that we'll look into and see if we can provide some wisdom on, but also speak to your librarian and look carefully at journals and understand what policy they have with regard to that. Journals are their own entities. They have different policies. Okay, other questions?
There is one on the chat asking about F1000 research.
Do you know much about F1000?
I've seen it in passing, but not in detail. So I think what it is an open research platform which supports data deposition and data sharing. But no, unfortunately, I don't have enough. I don't know enough about this to make a comment.
I just want F1000. Sorry.
Do you want to try publisher? Maybe that might point you somewhere.
No, that's not going to work. So let's look at prime reports then, or F1000 research. Yeah. So yeah, it's open access. It's covered in Scopus, Taylor and Francis. I don't know much about them either, but we would look at, for example, the title list. So if we look at, we go back to here. Oops. Yeah, so searching by the name doesn't work. That's annoying. Now my Excel is getting stuck. I'm doing a great job here.
I think it's fine. I think if anything, it shows that we don't know everything. So this is something that we have to like maybe look into in the future as well.
Do Control F. F1000 research. So it's indeed the publisher's name. And the journal is called AAS Open Research. It's active. So it's an active title. It's been added. So yeah, so this is the way to do it. So I did just a Control F like search for, and it hit it on the publisher name, F1000 Research, Taylor and Francis. So it's an active title in Scopus, right? So I don't see any problem with it for the moment. Now, if you want to know about So I guess what the person's asking is like, is it safe, right? So I don't see a problem with it looking in Scopus. I might search for it elsewhere. It's Taylor and Francis. So Taylor and Francis is a really big, reputable publishing house. So that's also gives some trust, right? And if you don't see warning signs like aggressive solicitation or any, if you don't have any sense that they're publishing in return for money without doing a peer review, website seems to look pretty good. Aims and scope is well written. Yeah, I don't see any problem with this, but again, like there's so many journals that are in Scopus. We're not an expert in all of them, and the point is that everyone as researchers, we need to kind of upskill ourselves to look into this and understand what the concept of a journal is, what's their vision, who's the owner. In this case, Taylor and Francis, and we saw that it's an active title that is indexed in Scopus. Number 11 of 74, so it's site score is not too bad, right?
Yep.
So that's looking pretty good. Okay, I see some questions suddenly. Do higher quartile journals, Q1 and Q2, require payment for publishing our manuscript? Not necessarily. So you have Q1 and Q2 journals. Some of them are open access, so that requires a fee to publish. And other ones are subscription journals. So it's free to publish as a researcher, free to publish in them. But the reader, so in that case, the institutions subscribe to get access to the content, right? So there are Q1 and Q journals of different models, both open access and non-open access. What is the difference between open access journals and closed access journals? What is the best among the two? Nicholas, you want to go into what it is?
Be happy to. So one of the key things that for the longest time, how articles were published happened when authors submitted their manuscripts over to editors and publishers of a journal. They would not have to pay a fee, but for readers to read it, they would have to pay to subscribe to the journal, right? This is what we call traditionally as subscription journals. Eventually, there was a change. People wanted to read for free, but of course, and to host a journal for free is actually impossible because there's a lot of costs attached to it. So if readers were to read for free, someone would have to pay for it, and that is actually funded through the author of the research article, him or herself, right? So it's kind of a flexible option. If the author were to pay what we call an article processing charge, then basically it means that their readers can read that research article for free. This is really the premise of what we call as open access. There is no term such as closed access that I'm aware of. So the biggest difference will be between Go open access or open access versus subscription articles. So these are two of the larger demarcations. There are many different types of open access. It can be divided into Go open access, hybrid open access, and green open access. But this all revolves around a discussion that should probably be had in the individual workshop by itself. This question also ties into another question in the chat when someone asked about open access journals and the journals and subscription journals, and if there's a difference in terms of its impact factor. I would say that there is no hard and fast rule pertaining to this. The best way for you to do so is to go to the relevant ANI database. So if you're asking for impact factor, you may want to go to Web of Science. If you're looking for site score, you probably want to leverage on Scopus. And in this case, you can do a proper comparison of the journals and their performances per se. I think that's probably the most accurate way to define it.
All right, so I see one more question pop up just now. What is the opinion about Mdpi publisher? There are a lot of controversies about this publisher. I don't know. I have never heard of them, so I have like no opinion at all. I can't give you an educated answer because I'm not aware of them, had any discussions, heard anything from anyone. Have you heard anything, Nick?
I've heard a lot of discussions about the controversies, but unfortunately, I cannot confirm nor refute anything because my knowledge of this is limited. But likewise, I've seen Mdpi being indexed on Scopus for a couple of titles as well. So I think it really depends on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. So we're almost at the end of the session. So there are some help things here. There's a Scopus blog that you can sign up to, subscribe to. I have a lot of interesting information about Scopus. If you like Twitter, you can follow Scopus on Twitter. There's an info site, elsevier.com/Scopus, has a lot of information as well as a librarian. What does the librarian toolkit have, Nick?
Give me a quick moment and I'll bring it up for you. But the one thing that we do have is the Scopus Librarian Certification Program. So this one, you can reach out to your individual CCs to express your interest, and we can sign you up for the program as well.
So last but not least, for those of you looking for certificates, you can claim your certificate using the following QR code or the URL that's below it. You must have the workshop code that's at the bottom of this page. You might just want to take a quick photograph of this page. You will be asked to complete a short survey that takes 3 minutes. Your rating of our performance as consultants is important to us. So if you can find the kindness in your heart to give us a good rating, that's appreciated. We certainly hope that today's session, as well as the other ones in the series, are helpful. It's always a bit of a thing to speak to people that you can't see. We miss coming to Malaysia and doing workshops in person. So that might be something we can continue at some point, but mixed with online, I think is inevitable that the future is a hybrid one. Today's session was recorded, so I'll make sure that a link to the recording is sent to you in a follow-up email tomorrow, as well as a link to the PDF of the slides. With that, I guess we'll see you next time, and have a good day and take care. I guess it's lunchtime, right, Nick?
Almost. In the meantime, I've copied and pasted the Librarian toolkit for those who are interested in the group chat. So please feel free to refer to it. You might find it helpful as well. But thank you very much. It was a pleasure sharing with you. And I'm sorry, my video got cut off halfway through, so I can't wave you guys goodbye. But it's been an absolute pleasure.
All right, I'll wave with 2 hands for you. All right, bye everyone. Take care. See you.
Cheers, Sander. Goodbye.